Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Gingerbread Snowflakes. That's right, I'm going to show you what I think is the best and easiest gingerbread cookie recipe. Plus, if you're into it, I'm going to show you how to give these a very seasonably appropriate snowflake design. So yes, even if you're not great at piping like me, you're still going to end up with something I think is very visually impressive. And by the way, since they are snowflakes, it's okay if each one looks a little bit different. That is kind of a snowflakes thing. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by getting the least exciting step out of the way. And that would be mixing up our dry ingredients, which will include some all-purpose flour, to which we will add some salt, plus some baking soda. No, not baking powder, baking soda. And then as far as spices go, of course we're going to need some ginger, as well as the almost as obvious cinnamon, plus a little bit of ground clove. And then because I like a spicy gingerbread cookie, I'm going to go ahead and toss in some freshly ground black pepper. Plus, yes, you guessed correctly, a few shakes of cayenne. And maybe more than a few shakes. Alright, it depends on my mood. And then we'll finish this up with one secret ingredient, a tablespoon of cocoa powder. At which point we'll take a whisk and give this a mix for about a minute until everything's thoroughly combined. Oh, and by the way, that was unsweetened cocoa powder. Okay, that really nice stuff we bake with. That was not the same stuff you used to make chocolate milk. But anyway, like I said, we'll give that a thorough whisking. And once that's set, we can move on to the slightly more exciting wet ingredients. And like almost all cookie recipes, that's going to start with some room temperature butter, to which we will add a little touch of white sugar. And then we'll take our hand mixer, and we will whip this until it's light and fluffy. And we've creamed that butter and sugar together, as it's called in the business. And for once, I actually let my butter warm up on the counter. So this step was pretty easy. Okay, if you try to do this with hard cold butter, it is much more difficult and profoundly annoying. And then once our butter and sugar have been creamed, we will stop and toss in one whole egg, plus a little touch of vanilla extract, the pure and the real. And then last but not least, we will add some molasses. Oh, and fun fact, white sugar plus molasses actually equals brown sugar, which is why a lot of gingerbread recipes just call for brown sugar instead. But I prefer the molasses versions, which I think have more flavor. And once all that's in there, we'll go ahead and take our mixer again, and we'll blend this all together, and we'll make sure we blend that egg first, and a little bit of the butter mixture. And then once that starts to emulsify, we can bring in a little more, until everything in the bowl has been beautifully mixed. And that's it. Once our wet ingredients are set, we'll go ahead and dump in our dry ingredients all at once. And then using a relatively stiff spatula, or if you want, I guess a wooden spoon, we'll go ahead and slowly and surely mix the wet and dry together. And after about a half minute of very thoughtful and deliberate smearing and stirring and folding, it will all start to come together, at which point we can get a little more aggressive and go a little faster. And before you know it, you will have formed a relatively stiff cookie dough, which hopefully is going to look a little something like this. And then once our dough is a go, we'll go ahead and transfer that onto a big piece of plastic wrap, and we will eventually fold the plastic over. And then we'll flip it over, and we will attempt to form this into a rectangle about 1 inch high by about 4 inches wide. And once this is chilled, you're going to see exactly why. Alright, so once that's all been encased in plastic, we will simply press and shape that into, like I said, something that's about 1 inch high by about 4 inches wide by about however long that is. At which point we'll transfer that into the fridge for about an hour or so, or until our dough is very cold and firm. And that's it. Once that's been accomplished, we'll pull it out of the fridge and unwrap it. And we will cut across every 3/8 of an inch, slicing from one end to the other. And if everything goes according to plan, you should get about 14 or 15 slices that size. And I would have, had I not taken part of the dough to try an experiment, where I attempted to use a piping bag to do the shape, which didn't work at all. But anyway, I just wanted to explain why a little bit was missing. But the good news is, the method I'm about to show you produces the exact shape we want without having to use a cookie cutter. And what we'll do once those are cut is cut each piece in half, and then each half into 3 equal pieces. And then we will take those pieces, which by the way have the texture of like clay, which is good because what we'll do is quickly shape those into a log, about 2.5 inches long, and we will place that down on a Silpat lined baking sheet. And then we'll do the exact same thing to 2 more of those pieces. And by crossing those like you see me doing here, we should be able to form a 6-pointed star. although they're not really going to be pointed until you kind of pinch the ends with your fingertips like I'm doing. And besides making the end of each one a little bit pointy, we will also want to press the center a little bit to kind of flatten it out. And then the plan is once these bake, we're going to have the perfect shape on which to pipe our snowflake design. And the reason I like this method so much is number one, we don't need a snowflake-shaped cookie cutter, because I don't have one of those. Do you? But even if you did, I find it very tedious to have to roll out sticky cookie dough, and then punch out the snowflakes and transfer them onto the sheet pan, and then you have to gather up all the scraps and roll it out again and punch out more. So for me, even though it takes a few seconds per cookie to get those 3 pieces of dough in the right spots, overall I find this a little faster and way less fussy. Speaking of which, I'm not sure why I'm doing so much fine-tuning here. Right, once these are baked, pretty much any imperfection is going to disappear. Although we do want to make sure we give those enough space. Right, if they bake into each other, that will definitely probably mess up our snowflake shape. And that's it, our pan is now ready to transfer into the center of a 350-degree oven for about 12 minutes or so, or until they look like this. And by the way, the exact cooking time is going to depend on whether you want these kind of chewy, or a little bit chewy and a little bit crispy, or fully hard and crispy like a ginger snap. And I'll talk more about that later. But for now, what we'll do is let these sit on the pan for 5 minutes, or at least enough so we can safely transfer them onto this rack, where we will let them cool down all the way, completely to room temp. And that's kind of important, since we never want to put icing on a warm cookie. So we will let those cool all the way down, and we'll make room for the rest. And once those are all baked and cooling down, we can move on to make our icing, which is nothing more than powdered sugar with a very small splash of cold fresh water that we will simply stir together until smooth. And I will get you close with the ingredient amounts, but this type of icing is definitely something you might have to adjust when you do it. And if yours is too runny, you'll have to add a little more powdered sugar. And if it's too stiff, you'll have to add a little bit of water. And if everything goes according to plan, once you mix this up, it should look very close to this. Right, you see how those ribbons of icing are staying on the top for a few seconds? That is pretty much what we're after. And another even better way to test is to drizzle some on the side of the bowl, and if it holds a nice sharp line and keeps its shape, you should be fine. And that's it. Once we're happy with the texture, we can go ahead and transfer that into a piping bag with a small round tip. Or of course, you can always use a Ziploc bag with a tiny tip of a corner snipped off. And once our cookies are cooled, we can go ahead and start making them look like snowflakes. And I'm going to show you several designs here, but we're going to start with the simplest, which is the old 3 lines and 6 dots method. All right, so we'll pipe 3 lines from point to point, and then point to point, and then point to point. And then between the lines, we'll attempt to make 6 small dots. And pro tip when you make the dots, keep the tip right against the cookie, straight up and down. And don't squeeze too much, because if you squeeze and pull up, it's going to flop over, and you won't have a dot, you'll have a dash. And I don't want dashes, I want dots. Although while the icing's wet, you can fix it. But not with my fat fingertip, I can't. I went ahead and grabbed a knife and used that, and I sort of kind of got that back in place. And yes, the first one always does come out the worst. And that's it, our first snowflake is done. All right, so that one was the most simple design. But for the next one, we will start exactly the same, but we will finish this one by piping 2 small angled lines off that larger center line. And as you'll see, that's going to give us a slightly more complex, more detailed snowflake pattern. And if you're keeping score at home, I think that's my favorite. All right, it's still simple, but there's just a little more going on. And then for the third and final design I'll show you, I started by doing 1 dot on each tip, and I followed that by piping a V right next to them. And then I connected those with our 3 mandatory lines, and of course our 6 dots. And then for a little extra crystallization, I went ahead and piped on 1 more set of lines, halfway down, for my most intricate, complex design yet. And just by putting an extra line here or an extra dot there, you can come up with all kinds of different variations. I mean, you are, after all, the ice queen of your icing, and you should design these any way you want. All right, as I already mentioned, snowflakes are like snowflakes. No 2 are the same, and none are perfect. Which, like us, is what makes them perfect. And that's it, I went ahead and did the rest. And I even tried to do a few experimental outlined ones, which didn't really come out that great. But that's fine, they don't have to. And then above and beyond the decorations, these are just truly great gingerbread cookies. And because these only bake for about 12 minutes, they're going to stay nice and chewy. Right, there might be a little bit of crispiness at the tips, but most of the cookie, especially in the center, will stay flexible. And that's exactly what I was in the mood for this time. But if we do want those crispy and crunchy, and more ginger snap-like, all we have to do is leave those in the oven for another couple minutes. So yes, cooking time is really the only difference between a ginger snap and a chewy gingerbread cookie like this. And the good news is, no matter what texture you decide to go with, this simple icing works beautifully on both. So I really did love everything about that cookie. And I decided to plate a few up in its natural habitat, next to a cup of hot coffee or tea. So I took a few pictures and ate a few more cookies before doing one final shot in a cookie tin. But anyway, whether you make these for an edible gift, or to impress some guests coming to your house, or just as a fun family project, no matter when or why you make these, I really do hope you give them a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.